Welcome to Let the Quran Speak. I'm Aisha, your host. Christmas is a time of reflection on the birth of Jesus, but what do we really know about his birth? In this episode, we review Christmas, the original story by Margaret Baker. This book explores the nature of Christmas stories and their use of Old Testament prophecy. We'll examine the way the book deals with two different stories of Jesus. Dr. Shabir Ally will share his thoughts on how ideas in this book align with the Quranic approach of the birth of Jesus. Welcome to the show, Dr. Shabir.
Pleasure to be on.
So we're reviewing a book that you've read, Christmas, the original story. So maybe let's start with what's so special about this book in terms of, in comparison to other books that you may have reviewed.
Well, first of all, I should say that the author, Margaret Baker, is an accomplished scholar. She's a Methodist preacher, but she has been awarded doctorate degrees. Or at least one doctorate degree. She's written several hefty books on temple theology and ancient Judaisms. This particular book is entitled Christmas, the Original Story, and what she does in this book is that she looks at every mention of Jesus' birth in the Bible, in various places, in the Gospels of Matthew, of Luke, and in some of the Pauline writings, where Paul says, for example, that Jesus was born of a woman. But she also goes outside of the Christian Gospels, and she looks at what are referred to nowadays as apocryphal Gospels, such as the Proto-Evangelium of James and the Infancy Gospel of Thomas and the Arabic Infancy Gospel, other such writings, and Gospels which are found among the Nag Hammadi scrolls, for example, the Gospel of Philip. And she tries to retrace what might have been the original thinking of Christians with regards to the birth of Jesus, but she doesn't even stop there. What really caught my attention was the fact that she devotes an entire chapter to the Quranic depiction of the birth narratives. That's her chapter 6. And as an appendix to that chapter, she calls from the Quran the birth narrative as it is related in chapters 3, 19, and then a brief mention in Surah 66, Surah Al-Tahrim.
So how does she relate sort of what we know in the story of how Jesus was born from the Quran in comparison to the other, the Bible and the apocryphal infancy narratives that she talks about? How does she tie in all of those?
Yeah, I should say from the start that it is interesting that she, in dealing with the Quran, in contradistinction with the approaches we have seen from other writers, she has dealt with the Quran in a very respectful manner, and rather than try to paint the Quran as a kind of distortion of biblical teaching, she has tried to show that the Quran actually is based on some early material, especially in some of these infancy Gospels. But more than this, she tries to show that some of these infancy Gospel narratives contain elements that are quite original and early. And at one point she says in the book that actually what is mentioned in the Proto-Evangelium of James, this might have been the original story based on which Luke actually condensed the material and presented in a different way.
So is she arguing that the current story and of how Jesus' story is portrayed in the Bible is not really as accurate as we may think it to be?
Well, yes, and in that case, she's not unique in that case, because this is what the historians now normally say, that all of the gospel writers each has an agenda. They want to portray certain ideas about Jesus, and they use the stories to portray those ideas. So there's a difference between theology and history. In writing history, you just simply write down the facts as they are. But in theology, you are trying to convey religious teaching. So what are the Gospels then? The Gospels are theological elaborations of history. So when something is told in the Gospels, they're told for theological purposes, not for the historical purpose. The historical narratives are only incidental to the main purpose, which is to convey the teachings of theology, of doctrine. So she agrees with historians on that score, and naturally she would view the Quran in the same way. The Quran is a theological document, and the history is not so much what the Quran is concerned with, but it's with the teaching. But where she is different in her approach is that though being a committed Christian, she is giving equal weight to the Quranic narrative, and she is willing to say in some instances that some detail in the Quran may have actually be a reflection of some early teaching about Jesus.
So what are some of the, I guess, main arguments that she points to when it comes to understanding Jesus and, Christmas as an original story and how it all started?
Well, what she shows is that the what is now called the apocryphal Gospels are not entirely legendary, as one might just simply discard them to be. She shows that both the apocryphal Gospels and the Gospels which are in the New Testament.
Sorry, just briefly, can you explain when you're talking about apocryphal, what does that entail?
Yeah, basically the term apocryphal can mean one of two things or both. Apocryphal can mean hidden, which means that it should be kept away from the public readings. Maybe one might read it privately, but it's not suitable for church teaching. This is how later church councils depicted these books and labeled them and banned them. But it could also mean that it has not been properly scrutinized, in which case the material is not so dependable. But the broad distinction, apocryphal, canonical, was a distinction between the books which are in the Bible, which are called canonical. They fit within the canon, the measure of what is a Christian scripture, and the books that are not within the canon, they are called apocryphal.
So a level of removal in some ways.
Yes, exactly. What we accept, what we do not accept. But what Margaret Baker shows is that the apocryphal Gospels continue to be widely used, and in fact in the Middle Ages these were more influential when it comes to Christian art and storytelling than were the Gospels which are found in the pages of the New Testament. And in that case, we can understand why the Quran often mirrors some of the information which is found in the apocryphal Gospels. Sometimes Christian apologists have discounted the Quran on that basis. They said, okay, the Quran is just rehashing what is found in the apocryphal Gospels, so we don't believe in those Gospels, we don't believe in the Quran either. But what she's showing is that the Quran it resembles narratives which were very common at the time when the Quran was being revealed. So that gives now a better understanding of the Quran, because if the Quran is talking to Christians about what they believe, now the Quran has a choice here. Do I tell Christians to go read the Bible all over again and take the stories from the Bible, or do I talk to them based on what they already understand? And obviously this is a quicker route to talk to people at the time, especially in a pre-literate society, when people have oral stories that they're already circulating among themselves, and they already know. The Quran took the shortcut, which is reasonable at that time, of talking to them about the stories they already know and drawing their attention to the theological truths which the Quran wanted now for them to believe in.
So is this how she presents two different stories of Jesus and how he was born? There's an older, not necessarily an older, but from the infancy narratives, this is how it was portrayed. From the current narratives, this is how it is, and this is how the Quran presents it, and then ties that all to sort of depict the story of Jesus?
Well, now we have not only two stories, but we have many stories. We have the Quranic depiction, we have the stories in the apocryphal Gospels. But if we think of two, then in historical discussions, most often the Gospels of Luke and Matthew are contrasted as two different stories. Well, they all have the birth of Jesus, which is common to the story. That's why they're baby Jesus stories. But to get to the birth of Jesus, we have two different sets of events, and even following the birth of Jesus. And historians have tried to reconcile them, but in the end, generally historians think that the two stories really are essentially irreconcilable, except for some minor points here and there. But let me give you some idea of how this becomes irreconcilable. They both have it that Jesus was born in Bethlehem. But how did the family get to Bethlehem for Jesus to be born there? In Matthew's depiction, it looks like they were already there and Jesus was born there. And now the problem is, how do they escape from Bethlehem, because Herod wanted to kill the male children. So they fled to Egypt, and then from Egypt they came back. But when they came back after the death of Herod, they learned that Herod's successor was more dangerous than the father. And so they now moved to Nazareth. And it looks like they finally end up in Nazareth after this, like, fleeing from Herod. And there they made their home. But in Luke's gospel, it looks like they're starting out from Nazareth. That's where the family lived. And they are moving away from they're moving to go and register in a census, which is ordered by one of the Roman rulers. And it's on their way now to go and register for this census in Jerusalem, where they happen upon in Bethlehem. And that's where Jesus now is going to be born, in Bethlehem. And Jesus is born there, and Jesus is presented in the temple 40 days later. So everything seems to be at peace. And there doesn't seem to be any hint here of a massacre of the infants, forcing the family to flee. Mm-hmm. They just leisurely present the child at the temple, and eventually they move back to Nazareth, which was the starting point. So these are like two completely different stories. Yeah. The common element is that they're born, Jesus is born in Bethlehem. So one might say, okay, well, that's the one fact we know about Jesus. But historians now doubt that one fact. And they say that, in fact, there was a prophecy that people understood. They thought that the Messiah must be born in Bethlehem.
This is based on the infancy or the apocalypse?
This is based on something that's mentioned in the Old Testament, in the Jewish Bible. Christians at the time understood that there's going to come a great figure who is called the Messiah, and this Messiah is going to be born in Bethlehem. So with that understanding that the Messiah is going to be born in Bethlehem, what historians are saying now is that Christians, thinking Jesus is the Messiah and the Messiah should be born in Bethlehem, they conclude Jesus was born in Bethlehem. Mm-hmm. And with that conclusion that he was born in Bethlehem, later on the stories are constructed to show that he was born in Bethlehem. So can we take these stories as proof that he was born in Bethlehem? No. They're saying we cannot take the stories as proof that he was born in Bethlehem, because actually the stories were basically constructed to give that impression. Whether that is true or not, he must have been born in some place. Could have been Bethlehem, could have been any other place, but we cannot take the stories as proof that he was born there.
Definitely intrigued me to read the book myself, so thank you.
Well, yeah, it's very interesting.
Thank you very much, Dr. Shabir.
You're welcome.
Hey YouTube, we hope you benefited from this video. If you liked it, or if you didn't, let us know in the comments below. And if you're interested in learning more, check out some of our other videos. And don't forget to subscribe so you can get new videos every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday.